All right. These are all various sources of tax literature, tax knowledge, and generally they're going to go down this way in terms of most significant, most important, and the highest ranking, all the way down to here. Not that these are completely useless, but these are sources of authoritative value. Now, why do we have the IRC as our authoritative literature for those authoritative literature questions that we have as SIMs? It's because it's the most authoritative piece of literature out there. It is the end all be all tax code. Just like the Supreme Court is the highest court of the land, and then there are smaller courts, right? So too are there different levels of authoritative literature. So these can be ranked in terms of their authority and importance. So if there's and we'll talk about what each of these are, but if there's a private letter ruling that goes against what the IRC says, well, then that private letter ruling is going to get struck down and it's not valid. Kind of similar to how the states and the federal government work. Although I'm not going to get into states versus federal government. I'm not the foremost expert on how that works. However, generally speaking, a lot of times the federal government can supersede some states. Here's an overview of these sources. We've got most authoritative to least. Now, as promised, first is the IRC. This is going to be the primary source of federal tax law in the US. It's the rule book, to put it in those terms, as it contains statutory provisions governing taxation. It holds the most authoritative value and serves as the foundation for all other tax-related guidance and interpretations. Next up, we have Treasury Regulations, and as we know, the IRS is a part of the Department of the Treasury, so it makes sense why we would have General Treasury Regulations also playing a role. These regulations are issued by the U.S. Department of the Treasury to provide guidance on how to apply the tax law that is outlined in the IRC. So while the IRC is a rule book, for sure it's got the most important value, there is interpretation. That's why we've got amendments to the Constitution. In our court system, we've got just all of the rules that were initially established. But guess what? As technology develops, as we as a society progress, there are different interpretations of that initial law. So the Internal Revenue Code, yeah, this can be adjusted for sure. But also we can have the U.S. Treasury Department or other institutions reinterpreting what the IRC means. And as such, great example, cryptocurrency, no one when they wrote the original IRC ever envisioned anything like cryptocurrency. So taxation of that as such would need to be subject to regulations because you can't go to the IRC about it because the IRC never really accounted for that. So diving into that, hopefully that was a great example for you. I know it was. They have the second highest force and effort, second only to the IRC, and are considered authoritative interpreting and applying tax laws. These may include temporary ones issued by the Treasury Department. Temporary, permanent, totally works. Next up, we've got revenue rulings and revenue procedures. These are items, again, like you should memorize all these, make sure you know what these are, because one, you could have a question that asks you, what is the most authoritative? You could have also just other questions saying, what is this describing? And if it's describing a revenue ruling, well, you want to know what that is, so you can choose it as the right answer. Revenue rulings are going to be issued by the IRS to provide official interpretations of tax laws and regulations. Now, these procedures are official statements of IRS practices and procedures. They're not as authoritative as the IRC or as Treasury Regulations, but they're going to provide valuable guidance to taxpayers and practitioners. So these are just decisions made by the IRS that, yes, the IRC goes above it, but if the IRS says, okay, in this one particular case, we're going to go this way, yeah, that's what we're seeing there. Next up, we have tax court decisions. We'll see this when we get into our lesson on the courts and the appeals process and the judicial process. Tax court decisions interpret and apply the provisions of the IRC in specific cases. So if you were the first one ever to conduct an operation where you bought and sold goods between Venezuela, Indonesia, and an incredibly complex situation, then maybe you go to the tax court and say, hey, everyone, I'm the first one to ever do this. Can we interpret the IRC and let me know how it applies to this particular situation? Something that the IRC did not account for. Although these decisions are not going to carry the same weight or authority as the IRC or Treasury Regulations, they're still going to be influential. Courts' interpretations of the tax law is going to be fundamental. It can be used as persuasive authority in similar cases. So if you do something that someone else did and the court ruled in that person's favor, you can use that tax court decision to benefit you in arguing your case. Next, you've got private letter rulings, and these are going to be items that are probably for more companies, high net worth individuals, and those who are going to get a private session with the IRS. These are going to be written determinations issued by the IRS in response to specific taxpayer inquiries, providing guidance on the tax treatment of a particular transaction or situation. So yeah, you as an individual, sorry, you're not that important. You're not going to get a private session with the IRS. and them addressing your unique tax situation. Also, it's quite likely you don't have tax situations that are that complex. However, big companies, high net worth individuals may have those. These private letter rulings cannot be relied upon as precedent by other taxpayers because it's specific to a certain situation. However, they can offer valuable insight into the IRS's position on a particular tax issue. I remember working at, well, the two accounting firms I've worked at up until this point. There would always be letters coming out and emails from the tax group about what the IRS has made a decision about. That is for the tax accountants within the firm to understand, and they can apply that. Going forward, is the IRS more lenient on taking deductions on a certain path? Then that would be important to know. However, that we'll talk about more so later on, how you should act as a tax preparer in what you do. Next, we've got IRS publications, forms, and instructions. Now, these materials provide taxpayers with general guidance on various tax topics and compliance requirements. While they do not have the same authority as everything above, they are going to be helpful resources. And then lastly, we've got IRS agent reports. So this is kind of similar to the private letter rulings, but this is the IRS as a whole. Whereas you can have an individual IRS agent, so not speaking on behalf of the whole IRS. Well, okay, that's agency law, and we'll talk about that in our lesson there. However, this is going to be also for a specific taxpayer situation. However, it's just one agent making the statement, whereas this is on behalf of the IRS. So you see the difference there. All these reports they apply to the IRC. IRS regulations and other forms of authoritative literature, they're not going to have the same level of authority of anything above. Also, because mainly like the whole tax court is going to be much more influential than one IRS agent. So we see the level of authority they all have. All right, here are some other ones, not in our rankings in terms of their authority in comparison, but just some other ones to know. These are items that the IRS may issue and others, and we'll see as we go through. These items are going to also serve as sources of tax law guidance, but they don't have the same level of authority as the previous slide. We've got a technical advice memorandum. Now, this is going to be issued by the IRS's Office of Chief Counsel in response to a request for technical advice from IRS personnel during the examination or appeals process of a specific taxpayer's case. So there's a process going on. Someone's appealing. The IRS said you should do this. They said no, we're going to appeal this. And this is the IRS saying what you should do. Technical advice as compared to what we've got general counsel, which we'll see in a second. While technical advice memorandums are not considered precedent for other taxpayers, meaning you can't rely upon it as the new taxpayer coming in and trying to argue your case, they are going to provide valuable insight. We see a lot of that valuable insight throughout all of these. Next, we've got the general counsel memorandum. Just again, make sure you're familiar with what all of these are. This is going to be a legal analysis provided by the IRS's Office of Chief Counsel, same as up there, to provide guidance and advice on tax law issues. This is, again, not going to be binding on taxpayers, but it could be helpful as well. So this is more technical tax advice issued by the Office of Chief Counsel. This is more general legal advice provided by that Office of Chief Counsel. Next, we've got, well, what about us as tax professionals? What about our opinions? Do they matter? Kind of. An opinion provided by a tax professional such as a CPA, hey, that's going to be you soon, or tax attorney carries weight based on the expertise and reputation of the professional. However, obviously, this is not going to be, the IRS and the IRC has a lot more weight over you as a tax professional, as great as you may be. Maybe you worked in the industry for 40 years, but they're the law of the land. These opinions are not authoritative sources of law, but they can give valuable guidance and analysis of complex tax issues. You, as someone who's worked in the industry, you're an expert. Yeah, you're going to be able to give a lot of insight. Lastly, a conclusion reached in a legal periodical, so like an article or a newspaper. Articles and analyses published in legal periodicals such as tax journals and law reviews can provide insight into tax law issues based on the research and expertise of the authors. So again, kind of similar to we could say these two are grouped together and these two are grouped together. It's you maybe Googling some tax law advice. That's why we're not ranking this against the IRS or the IRC or the courts or anything, because these are all just items where you can go to get advice, but obviously nothing is going to compare to what we saw on the previous slide. These publications are not authoritative sources of law, but they can also be useful for getting an idea of what to do. And that's also very important because whether you're a taxpayer or preparer or anyone in between, it's your job to do as much due diligence as you see fit, making sure you're doing research and making the right decisions when it comes to preparing those taxes. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.